Hi, everyone. Today, we're going to talk about startup to enterprise, build front-end and full-stack apps that scale. So here's our agenda today. We're going to talk about what AWS Amplify is. I'm really excited to share with you all the new things that we've been working on all this year and some new announcement we just recently had. We're going to look at a customer story. So we have a special guest today. We'll introduce her soon. And so you can talk to and hear a story from a real-life customer who uses AWS Amplify. We're going to then introduce Amplify Gen 2. I'm going to go through all the new features, everything that's out for it. We're going to look at some of the different categories that we have that Amplify handles, including authentication, storage, data, functions, and AI. And then we're going to look at hosting and how you can host your website with AWS Amplify. So we got a lot here, and we'll leave plenty of time at the end for question and answer from the audience. So let me introduce myself. My name is Eric Hanched. I am a senior developer advocate. I have Ritik here. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you. Hey, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you for coming in. I know it's been a long day, but you're all troopers for being here. I'm Ritik Advani. I am a senior startup solutions architect here at AWS, and I work with startups to help them build and grow on AWS. So startups to enterprise, right? It is quite an evolution. It is quite the journey. And if you're wondering what really stays common throughout that journey, your business objectives generally, tend to be aligned to what your customers want. And our customers are demanding. They want us to be able to iterate quickly and deliver applications to them that are engaging, scalable. They're able to handle spikes. We want our developers to also have a great experience, right? So your dev teams, when you're starting out from smaller team as they grow, the developer experience needs to be able to handle as you add more people onto your teams and deliver more applications. And we can never forget availability and reliability, right? Your reputation as a startup sort of depends on how well you're able to deliver for your customers. Now let's take a look at what does change, right, throughout that evolution. If you think about, can I safely assume that everybody here is a builder in some form of capacity? Raise your hand if you're not a builder, rather than the other way around. Okay. All right, so rather bright. I didn't see any hands raised, which is good. So in the early stages, right, when you're in an incubator, accelerator, in a dorm room or a garage somewhere, you might start off with a tech stack that the founders are familiar with. And we don't like to repeat ourselves as builders. We like to reuse what we know. And at this point, your frameworks that you use to build might be of the open source kind. You might be building one or two apps, and you build it, you run it. But as you grew, this journey used to look quite different. You would start adding maybe your own components. So if any of this sounds familiar to you, when you would have like base POM XML files for your Java backends, your Spring backends, because as you started growing, you would add more services. Or you'd have your own UI libraries with your own branding and styling. And you do that in the growth stages as you start finding product market fit and start onboarding more customers. And your development teams might also start adding new flavors of engineers and builders. So you would typically have people who would either build front-end applications or the back end of it, and you might have other people who would actually run it and separate operations teams altogether. And as you grew into a unicorn and an enterprise, you would add more complexity and more layers to that. So your frameworks would start becoming a little more bespoke. You would have multiple apps. You would have multiple developers and engineering teams. And there might even be separate needs for a platform team and roles like SRE. And all of that used to be the typical growth journey that you would see as a startup would progress through different stages of product market fit to scaling, to hopefully becoming a unicorn and growing into a well-settled enterprise. But what we've noticed is over the years, front-end developers have become full-stack developers. what does that really mean, when we say full stack? So if you look at the spectrum of an application, so if I have, let's say, my phone in my hand, and if I go from the screen backwards, what I see, on the right side of this, this little spectrum over here, that's where you have your front end. And you'd use technologies like HTML, CSS, JavaScript to build all of that. And then as you progress backwards from there, if you think sequentially, those apps would make a call to an API, which is running on a server somewhere, which might, be written in server-side languages. So your Javas and your .NETs and Pythons and what have you, running on different kinds of servers. You would have your Tomcat and IIS, and then eventually storing data in a database somewhere. Used to be pretty much relational. That's not the case anymore, is it? Nowadays, what we're seeing is the full stack app has essentially changed a bit. So your front-end developers can traverse all the way from the right to the left without having to rely on learning a new language, a brand new technology. You would use something like a GraphQL, which would let you write your queries, mutations, and essentially build out the API to match what data the front end needs and quickly iterate. Behind that, instead of having your server-side languages, which would be separate from the front end, you could now write it all in Node and JavaScript and TypeScript. And even in terms of actually operating your backend and your business logic, we're starting to see a shift towards building serverless applications. So instead of having a provisioned server or a VM or an EC2 instance, you might have your API literally function as a serverless, either the container on something like Fargate, or just run inside a Lambda, or just as a GraphQL resolver. That's where your business logic could now reside. And your database, again, if you're able to communicate with it using your GraphQL, you don't necessarily need a new set of skills that your front-end teams now need to learn to build this full-stack application. As a result, we're starting to see that front-end developers are now driving cloud decisions, right? So from the pixel that I see on my screen, to when I press a button, to when a call goes out to some API, to the eventual point where a byte is written into a storage somewhere in a data center, all of this can now be done by these full-stack developers, and you could build these apps a lot more quickly and iterate. This is why we built AWS Amplify. We built Amplify to make it easy for front-end developers to build full-stack applications. How many of you are familiar with Amplify or have built with Amplify? So let's do a little show of hand. Oh, a healthy few. That's nice. Great. So if you're familiar with Amplify and you've maybe dabbled with it in the past, we have a lot more cool new capabilities coming that Eric is going to talk about a little later today. But hundreds of thousands of customers like you have already been using Amplify to accelerate their time to market and to grow their startups more quickly. And to hear one such story, I'd like to call upon stage Chiara Antonucci, CEO and founder of Abit. Welcome, Chiara. Thank you for joining us here today.
Thank you, Agritech, and thank you for asking me.
So, Chiara, you used to be in consulting, and now you're a founder of an Agritech startup. What prompted you to found Abit?
Yes, I will start with some number. FAO said that 80% of the world food comes directly from agriculture. I was a consultant, as you said, and I was a consultant for food companies, very big food companies in Italy. And one day, I was having an art discussion with the director of the R&D, and at one time, he asked me, do you know how much is the cost of the sugar? I was just like, oh, no. But I think a lot about this question. And because sugar was the key element of their production. And thinking, I realized that there was a big problem with sourcing and evaluation of raw material. So I started working backwards. And I discovered that agriculture had a very big challenge. Looking at some number, we know that population is expecting to grow to 9.8 billion people in 2050. But on the other side, agriculture is responsible for using the 70% of fresh water in the world and is using 50% of arable land and is responsible also to the 24% of the global emission. So the question was how to get out of this loop. And we dive deep, and we discovered that two of the biggest problems was soil degradation and decline of soil biodiversity, because soil health is critical not only for food production, for sure, but also for ecosystem and for climate mitigation. But the problem is that farmers do not have access to tools to know if the soil is healthy or not. That's where Abit came in. Abit is the first Agritech solution that uses soil biodiversity as a KPI to help farmers. We provide data-driven platform to help farmers analyze soil health and soil biodiversity and develop long-term strategies to improve productivity and sustainability. Think about it as a diagnostic tool, but for soil health. Similar to how advanced technologies for diagnostic have transformed medicine, but for agriculture.
That's really amazing. That's really inspiring. So how does the platform work? Like how do you help these farmers out today?
Yes, the platform starts using heterogeneous data source, like soil samples, satellite data, weather data. And all these data are elaborated via different proprietary algorithms to calculate from one side the biodiversity index and on the other side to predict how soil will evolve in the future. We provide our customer different services, for sure the biodiversity index, but we give them some tailored recommendation to improve and enhance soil biodiversity, the CO2 monitoring to know how much CO2 is stocked in their soil. We help to build some sustainability certification and to do field monitoring. In between the data analysis and the platform is where AWS Amplify was fundamental for Abit. Because AWS Amplify was instrumental in enabling our developers to quickly and efficiently create a full stack application, as you said. We decided to build a full stack, this platform, because we're starting from laboratory. But when we analyze soil in laboratories, we see something just like in this slide. The soil is one of the most complex ecosystems in the world. You imagine that in just 1 teaspoon, there are more than 20,000 living organisms. So if you put this soil sample in the laboratories, you can see animals, very small insects, fungi, bacteria, and so on. But if you see the things like in this image, it's very difficult to communicate outside the laboratory. This is why technology is so crucial for us. Technology allows us to take this complex data and transform in something usable. It was a matter of transforming complexity into clarity to help farmers.
That picture definitely took me back to my high school lab and also somehow killed my appetite in one go. Thank you so much for sharing that. So, when you were embarking on this new adventure and you're starting to think about how you would build this technology platform, how did you choose AWS, and how has that partnership helped you in essentially building out this tool for the farmers?
The decision was hard, for sure. But at the end, the partnership has been vital for Abit. Let me break down why in 3 key areas for us. The first one is our need. For sure, we have some needs that are coming from the innovative sector, the startup world, and is to be scalable and fast. And for sure, to have cost optimization. But there are 2 more needs that I care a lot. That is timing and agility. Timing, because when you work in Agritech sector, you cannot deliver your solution when you want. But when it's the right time for nature, this is very critical. And the other one is agility, because we can consider the Agritech sector like new sector, and for sure it's a market that is moving faster here over here. So here is where AWS Amplify provide the ideal ecosystem to meet these needs. Because with AWS Amplify was easier to start, but most of all, AWS Amplify is ready to grow. So AWS Amplify gave us the possibility to scale faster, so to move from one region to more countries, from one farmers to more farmers, and so on, and gave us the possibility to experiment, to test, and move on, and for sure to reduce the initial investment. Here I can show some impactful number that highlight the AWS Amplify value for Abit. We developed and launched our MVP in just 6 months. Wow. We have 70% development cost reduction, and for sure it allows us to relocating this resource to other initiative. And we got 68% faster time to market. That was very, very critical for us. The third part that I would like to underline is the onboarding experience. As I said, choosing Amplify was an hard decision for us, because we started from zero. Okay. We were just a startup with an idea, and with just 2 developers. And AWS Amplify was totally new for us. What really helped us was the possibility to collaborate with AWS, the collaboration with solution architect, with the accelerator, taking part into the communities, the possibilities to have video training, and the collaboration with the advanced partner. All these kind of things make the return on investment double. After an initial investment, we doubled the speed of development.
That's cool. That's really amazing. So now that you've been in the market for a while, you've already got this version out, what's next for Abit? What's next on your roadmap?
So for us, future means innovation. But we have underlined 4 areas of innovation and for our future. The first one is responding to regulatory changes.
Right.
For us, it's very important. Imagine that in 2019 in Europe, there was the Green Deal, but it was only a schema for the green transition. Mm-hmm. In 2024, we have 54 regulations coming from the Green Deal. Wow. So it's very important for us to be prepared to respond to regulatory changes. But if we have to respond to regulatory changes, we have to keep in mind that we have to anticipate market trends. So we have to be proactive. we don't have to wait, but we have to be proactive. Sometimes we have to do some bet on what will be the futures. For sure, we have to develop and use technology to leverage this speed. To do just an example on what I said, for us, artificial intelligence was one key point, for sure. But as the time goes, the satellite data become very important in agriculture. So we decide to integrate the satellite data, even because the regulatory ask to the farmers to have this data. So we decide to integrate and to elaborate satellite data. So we starting working on SageMaker Geospatial. And when we decide to do that, we have a huge problem in our mind. We said, okay, we start using satellite data, but how to integrate, how to put the satellite data to the platform. And another time, AWS Amplify helped us because the integration between SageMaker and AWS Amplify ensure that our models, our algorithms, and the geospatial capabilities are not just powerful, but also easy deployable, giving us the agility to release new features and updates without rebuilding our architecture.
Oh, what a wonderful example of starting quickly, growing with the data, and then scaling up as well. So if I were to ask you what's a key takeaway we'd like our audience to learn from you today, from your experience so far, what would you say that would be?
So I think that the key takeaways for today are one for the Agritech sector, and is agriculture must evolve, but must evolve even to meet the demand of sustainability. And technology is the enabler to do that. From who are not working in the Agritech sector, for sure, I would like to say that AWS Amplify provides the perfect foundation to bring your ideas to life quickly and scale, like in our case.
Well, thank you so much, Chiara. Thank you for the partnership.
Thank you
for using Amplify and sharing your story. And thank you for joining us here today.
Thank you, too.
Thank you. All right. Thanks, everybody. All right. And to tell you all that's new with Amplify, I'm going to give it back to Eric.
Thanks, Ratik. Thanks, Chiara. That was an amazing story. It's really awesome to hear customer stories and see how they are using AWS Amplify. So like I had hinted at the beginning of this presentation, that we have a lot new in the AWS Amplify world, and it's really comes from our customers and what they want. So let me show you a little bit about it. Let me introduce you to Amplify Gen 2. Has anyone here used Amplify Gen 2? Maybe one or two. So AWS Amplify Gen 2 just went into general availability earlier this year. And it's a different way to work with Amplify than you may have used in the past. So we really focused on TypeScript and the developer experience behind it. So we wanted to make sure all our tools were type safe and that you can develop really quickly. I'm a huge TypeScript fan, and that's where we started from. We also wanted to make sure that you could have a nice CICD flow so you can easily deploy your code on our Amplify hosting service. So we introduced Git branches and Git pushes connected directly to our backend Amplify hosting provider. And I'll show you a little bit about how that works. And then one thing we've noticed in our previous versions of Amplify was some people wanted to really go beyond what Amplify had. So we made sure that we had CDK as a first-class citizen. Everything you build on Amplify you also be built on CDK, and you can drop down to the CDK layer if there's something that we don't offer. And we think that's a really powerful pattern. So really, Amplify is a set of tools to help front-end developers create full-stack apps and websites. You can kind of think of it as like a la carte. You can kind of take pieces that you need. You don't have to use all of it. So here are a few of the features that we offer. One is end-to-end type safety. I'm going to show you a quick demo of how this works. We also have Git-based full-stack CICD, a little bit about what I mentioned earlier, but the way you can have your branches connected to your backend, which is really nice. We have this file-based convention. I'll show you how to get started there. We have some sandboxes, Gen AI. We redesigned our management console. If you're in the AWS console and you type in Amplify, you'll see a brand new, nice, user-intuitive interface to do everything with Amplify. And then we also, once again, I want to mention this again, is that it is built upon CDK, and that is really important to us. So let's start this demo. You can see here I have on the right-hand side on one side you can see the server code, and this client models to do create is on the client. So in real time, I'm building a data schema for my to-do. I'm adding a location, a latitude, and a longitude. And as I'm adding it in and saving it, the client side will actually now have this inside and be able to, it'll recognize it. And you can use IntelliSense to complete it. So for example, we had priority here, and now priority high, low, and medium is there for us to use. So this makes it really quickly to iterate on your data side. This is a resource file that lives in an Amplify folder in your front-end code, and this is basically defines your infrastructure. It looks probably a little bit different than you see if you're used to CDK. This is actually kind of a higher level construct. We just wanted to make it really straightforward for you to start building on Amplify and creating your data. But this is just one of the features we introduced in Gen 2. We really wanted to make sure that end-to-end that you were taken care of. So here's a diagram of kind of the full stack experience that you would expect using Amplify Gen 2. You would have your front-end code and your favorite framework. I'm a huge Vue.js fan, but it could be React, Angular, Astro, whatever you guys use next. And then you can build your app using Amplify's open source tools. We have a UI components library that I'm going to show you some examples of soon. We have some JavaScript libraries, some TypeScript libraries. We even have a Figma to code option if you'd like to design your website in Figma and then have it available in your front end, which is really neat. Then you have your infrastructure that you build, all the services that you would need, like S3, Cognito, AppSync, and that would be hosted. We're going to have a similar diagram later on in the presentation and how this relates to Amplify hosting. This is a really nice new feature. One thing we heard from our customers is that they're using AWS Amplify and they need to test locally. And it wasn't always easy to actually test locally. Some people were mocking servers and doing all sorts of things. So we wanted to make sure that if you have an application built on AWS Amplify, you could just test it quickly. So what we came up with is these things called ephemeral environments. Ephemeral environments can be stopped or restarted or deleted at any time. You can share it between one or more software developers. In this case, we have Renee, Joseph, Danny, Nikhil. All of them have their environments running on their local machines. They have their front-end code, they have the back-end code, and then they can spin up this ephemeral environment that lives in the cloud and then test locally. And then when they're done, they can delete that environment. So this has really seen an increase in productivity from our developers to get up and running and test quickly. Once again, we have this Git branched way, this Git flow way of handling resources and handling environments. So if your front-end developers are testing locally using the ephemeral environments, what do you do about your QA? Maybe you have product management. Maybe you have other people that need to see the environments and see what the developers are working on. So now you can create a branch in your Git in your Git workflow, each branch can be connected to a different environment. So for example, we have main can be connected to the prod environment. So this would be the environment that your users would see. But maybe we have a development branch for our developers to test against. Then maybe we have a couple different feature branches that we push into. And this can be all quickly set up for you with your version control system and with our Amplify hosting. You can also, let's imagine you're using this development environment. You don't want the whole world to see it. You can password protect that environment. And we have branch previews and a lot of other nice things. So how do you get started today? We would use this npm create amplify at latest. So I believe you have to have node 18 or higher. You just run this command, and then it creates this folder structure. Typically, you would just run this in the same place you have your front-end code, and this is where you can start defining your back-end, your infrastructure. And it's all in TypeScript, and you can incrementally extend it as you go on. And we have some nice boilerplate code to get you started, to set up your data and set up your Cognito backend, or for your identity provider. So what services would you expect that AWS Amplify is focusing on Gen 2? And we really picked these 6. It's a lot. So we have the data layer. So that resource file that you saw earlier, in that demo where I had one side was the client, one side was we're defining the model. That is backed by AWS AppSync, and then that's where you can define your models and your relationships and everything you would expect from your data, from your database, and when you're defining it. AWS AppSync is our managed GraphQL service, although at this point I would say we've abstracted away a lot of the complexity of GraphQL, and so that way you can just use our API, our libraries, without having to write raw GQL or anything like that. I think a modern application today, I'm a huge AWS Lambda fan, so using functions I think is the right way to go, and you can easily set up functions with AWS Amplify, and this really nice interface. We'll look at a little sneak peek of what the code looks like to set that up. We have auth, which is backed by Amazon Cognito. This is where you can do your federated, your logins, kind of your user directory. You can do federated logins, all sorts of things. Storage, we're backed by S3. Gen AI, you probably have heard a lot on generative AI, this reInvent. So AWS Amplify is no different. We released something new recently in there. I'm really excited to show you guys all about it. I think it makes connecting to Amazon Bedrock and large language models really, really straightforward and simple. And then, of course, to reiterate again, you can always go back down to the CDK layer if there's a service that you need to create that we don't offer these high-level constructs for, like we do with data, functions, auth, storage, and Gen AI. This is our authentication, what kind of the libraries. Like I said, we're a la carte. You can use this if you like. You don't have to. But if you are needing to add a sign-in or sign-out or federated login to your front-end application, we have a pre-built UI component library that with just a few lines of code, it would add this login system. You can then easily customize it to what your look and branding and feeling needs are. And then it's also handles some really nice use cases like multi-factor authentication and, of course, the things you would expect, like forgot your password and things like that. You can also hide the sign-up and just have a sign-in interface with it. If you decide you don't want to use our pre-built UI components library, which, by the way, is all completely open source. We're always looking for people to submit issues with or feature requests. We also have a JavaScript, TypeScript client library that you can use. We actually have several different types of libraries depending on what platform you use. And those ones will add, those you basically can just create your own UI however you like it, and then it will connect to Cognito to do all the things you need to do. So you can create basically your UI yourself. Now, Amplify data, once again, we showed that demo earlier, but it's that managed GraphQL service called AppSync, and it's that AppSync service by default talks to DynamoDB, but if you do have another database, like an RDS database that you've already created, you can connect it to that. And this is, we offer libraries to make it easy to connect and talk to AppSync. So you can do all your create, read, update, delete lists, subscriptions, which is really nice, and everything you need for that, including a new feature that there was a new feature that we just had come out. It's called Event API, the Events API. And this actually doesn't use GraphQL at all, but it's nice pub/sub way to connect to do a publication submit communication with your AWS service. So this would be great for like chatting, a whole bunch of different use cases. But it just came out, and I just wanted to make sure you guys are aware of it. We do have Amplify storage, and Amplify storage is a way to create your S3 buckets. We have a couple of different libraries. One is just to talk to that S3 bucket to do everything you expect, like uploading data, getting signed URLs back, listing the data that's in there. We also have other APIs so you can track your uploads, things like that. And then a really nice new feature we just released a few days ago, 3 days ago, is something called Storage Browser. And Storage Browser is a way to have like a visual interface for your S3 bucket. So you can put on your web page, maybe you connect it to your corporate login, like your Enter ID, or maybe just Amazon Cognito. You can have each one of your users have their own bucket, and they'll have a nice interface to upload files, delete files, list files. It's really nice. If you go to the Storage Browser product page, you can actually see a nice little video. I did that video. I think this is going to be really, really great for people that want to have that nice visual experience when using your S3 bucket. And of course, it has this really nice authorization layer in it too. Lambdas, I think, are extremely important. I use compute and serverless every time I'm using my applications. And we have a nice interface to create this Lambda. You can see some of the code here where you can use this define function. You can create a Lambda really simply. It's typed. And then it also handles everything I'm showing you today. Probably some of you will be like, what about your IAM security rules? What about all that? We do that all for you. That's, of course, everything in AWS. Security is number one. So we make sure that is secure for you. We also have a library that handles the talking to this Lambda function. And you can use it for all different scenarios, like resolvers for GraphQL APIs. You can do, every time a user signs up, you can have a Lambda be triggered. You can just put it behind a REST API, maybe through API Gateway. But there's a lot of different use cases, and we make it just really straightforward to add one of these in there. Recently, we just added in layers as well. So with all these new features, we saw this opportunity of adding generative AI. And we saw a lot of our customers liked to use large language models backed by Amazon Bedrock. And so we reintroduced a new feature to AWS Amplify, and we're calling it Amplify AI Kit. And this is really, we think, anytime you need to talk to a large language model in Amazon Bedrock, this is a very straightforward, intuitive way to use it. So we have a couple of things. First, in that same resource file I showed you earlier, you can define system prompts and different models you want access to. We have an API then to talk to those models. You can define your arguments that you expect. You can define the outputs. It's all in JSON. As a front-end developer, I think that's really nice. I don't have to worry about having unusual returns back from the large language model. We handle that for you. We use a Converse API. And then we offer a client, an open source client API library and UI component library, so that way you can talk to the models. And also, we really found that chat was a great way to talk to some of these models. And so we created a UI component library and some UI component APIs to create a chat interface. Now, this is for React only right now. And you can add this to your React app. It adds the chat interface. You don't have to worry about setting up WebSockets or any of the other real-time communication that you would if you had to do this all yourself. You just add a few lines of code, and it connects up to the large language model and whatever prompts you set up. In this case, I just asked it to show me some properties, and it gave me this interface. It really, you're probably thinking chat, this is very plain. However, we added some really nice features to this. Come see me afterwards if you'd like to see them, where you can have specific outputs of the chat for you depending on your use case. Let's imagine you're using this with a bunch of customer facts or frequently asked questions, and this pops up on your web page, and someone can ask it a question. But you don't want it to just show in a straight chat interface. You can create a response component is what we're calling it. And this response component would then have exactly an interface that you like. It's a basically React component. So we can make a nice little card. And the card could have information that the large language model is returning and have it a nice little interface for you. And it can be interactive as well. So it's really powerful. We really wanted to make this really straightforward and easy to use. And it's great. So Amplify hosting. I think this is probably one of our most popular services that we have with the Amplify name. This can be used by itself, or you can use it with some of these other things I just showed you earlier with the functions and the generative AI and the Amplify AI kit. But it's a managed web hosting platform. We can tie into your CICD deployments, and it really works with this full stack idea. And so we have some features here. One is that we support all the major frameworks out there that you would expect a web development hosting platform supports. And we support server-side rendered apps, static site generated apps, Next, React, Angular, Vite. We support custom domains, of course, and we set it up with, you can set that up with Amazon Route 53 or point your existing registrar over. We have fine-grained access controls. We have multiple environments mapped. So that diagram you saw earlier, you can have each environment based on your Git branch go to a different environment. We have notification builds. We have hooks. We have branch previews. And we're adding more features all the time. Here would be an example of maybe a website that you would have up and running on Amplify hosting. You would have Amplify host your website. You would have the front end in your favorite framework that you choose. You can then use our UI components library, our different Amplify libraries, or even our Figma to code to create that front end however you like. And then everything would be hosted in our backend, in our managed, globally distributed hosting service. And you can then use our Gen 2, or you can use our Generation 1. Everything works fine either way. I want to give a shout out to Amazon Q developer, because as I've been working here at this conference and talking to so many people, Amazon Q has gotten so, it just keeps getting better and better. And so we call it the most capable generative AI powered assistant for building, operating, and transforming software. In other words, you can add this as an extension in VS Code, or you can use a number of different IDEs, and it really just helps you become faster at software development. It has some really key tenets. We call this build, operate, transform, and data and AI. If you've seen some of the keynote announcements, you've probably seen some of this information before, but we just want to mention it because it's really powerful, and especially if you're using AWS and you're at an AWS conference, try out Amazon Q in your IDE, see how well it works for you. We really think it's really great for the whole software development lifecycle. We believe it's really great at security. So one thing I was using it for the other day, I was creating some demos, and it told me, you should check this. This could be a security vulnerability. And that was awesome. And you can definitely I think it's really awesome to use with any sort of application that you're running for a lot of different use cases. Thank you.